had a little extra time for the 4th of July holiday to do some channel surfing, to be honest. And you know, there were all these 4th of July movies, and most of them involved lots of explosions and some alien attacks and things like that. But I actually stumbled across not quite so violent movie that happens to be one of my favorites for just pure escapism. It's called The American President. Have any of you seen it? Some of you have. It stars Michael Douglas as a widower president, and Annette Bening is a lobbyist, and they begin a relationship. It's written by Aaron Sorkin, who is, I think, one of the best writers on any size screen. But anyhow, the sort of plot develops that as Douglas and Bening find their way in a relationship, he's also involved in a challenging re-election campaign, and his opponent is seizing upon the relationship to sort of engage in some character attacks, some character assassinations, right? And Michael Douglas is just sitting there sort of stoically taking it and saying, you know what, I'm not going to respond, we're just going to debate the facts and the topics and all that stuff. But then his opponent goes a bit too far, because he discovers a picture of Annette Bening during her college years burning an American flag at an anti-Vietnam War rally. And so the president's opponent sort of blasts her for this and attacks her. And now the president's angry, you know. He's picked to fight with this girl, so to speak, right? So finally the president decides, I'm going to give this guy a civics lesson. And he comes into the press room and he makes a pretty amazing speech. America is advanced citizenship, if we get it. You're going to want it bad, because it's going to put up a fight. It's going to say, you want free speech? Let's see you acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil, who's standing center stage and advocating at the top of his lungs that which you would spend a lifetime opposing at the top of yours. You want to claim this is the land of the free? Then the symbol of our country can't just be a flag. The symbol also has to be one of its citizens exercising his right to burn that flag in protest. Show me that. Defend that. Celebrate that in your classrooms. Then you can stand up and sing about the land of the free. That's pretty good stuff, huh? Yeah. It's smart stuff. I mean, here he holds these two images that we think are mutually exclusive. A flag which we love and someone burning the flag that we love. And he says, no, these two images belong in the same country. If we're to be that country that we say we are. Now I share that little speech with you not just because it seems sort of appropriate for 4th of July weekend and all of that, but also because I think that the work in holding those two images together as one is similar work to what we Christians have to do when we read Scripture. Because truth be told, so much of Scripture is filled with what seem like conflicting images and messages. And somehow we have to figure out a way to hold them together as one. Today's Gospel is just an example of it. At the end of it, Jesus said, take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And those are comforting words. They feel great. They're probably familiar to some of you, and they're sort of heartwarming for me. And yet, if you've been paying attention to what Jesus has been saying over these last few weeks, then they should set buzzers off in your head. Because for me, I'm thinking, wait a second. What do you mean? My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Because just a couple of weeks ago, like sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, that's a great metaphor, isn't it? Now you're saying my yoke is easy, my burden is light. We've been getting, in this portion of Matthew, a series of comments about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to sort of to embrace Jesus' mission. And these words, this teaching, it's filled with contradictions. Jesus not only says, like sheep in the midst of wolves, and then says, well, take my yoke, it's easy, my burden is light. He also says, do not think I've come to bring peace, I've come with a sword. Now, how can the guy who says that also be the guy whom we name as the Prince of Peace every Christmas Eve? How can those two things be held together? Jesus says, if you find your life, you will lose it. And if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. What? What does that mean? And then he gets into this yoke business and my life burden. Contradictions happen. But the work for us to do as Christians, if we're gonna take all of Scripture seriously, is the same work that I think Michael Douglas was speaking to Americans about. And that is the work of coming to terms with paradoxes. Now, I live with an English teacher, as most of you know, so I had to make sure that I went to the dictionary to look up the definition of paradoxes. Because I didn't want to get it wrong in front of her. Paradox is when you have two kind of competing truths that seem mutually exclusive. But somehow, there's a way to reconcile them as one and the same. Two images, two truths, two things that seem exclusive. But somehow you can reconcile them as parts that belong together. That's paradox. That's what this is today. Come before, as we wrestle with Scripture. It's about a paradox. Now look, I get that there are people out there who will hear the contradictory messages of our Scripture, and they will point to those contradictory messages, and they will say, that's why that Christianity is just wrong. It just doesn't make sense. And I know that there are people who sit in the pews right here who are struggling with their faith. Who read these contradictions and find them as mystifying, as stumbling blocks. It's true. And yet, if we can somehow wrestle with them and see the richness of a paradox and find that in the richness of a paradox, you come to a greater understanding, a greater truth, find that they're not contradictions, but they are different facets of the same experience. If we can do that hard work, then we're so much the richer. I think that these contradictions, these so-called contradictions in our Scriptures, can hold together. Jesus said, I'm not coming to bring peace, I'm coming with a sword. And it doesn't mean that he's coming to wield that sword. What he knows, what he's warning his disciples about, is that by his very example, by his calls for justice, by his willingness to associate with the most unclean of people, by his inclusivity and his love and his forgiveness, that people will be threatened and people will respond with violence. He's not swinging that sword, but he's saying, listen, you got to understand that with this grace comes this violence. Those two things sadly go together. And when he said, whoever loses their life for my sake, he's not just talking about the martyrs, and sure enough there are some, but what he's talking about is losing our way of life. Our old way of life that sometimes was about exploitation or about prejudices or about exclusion or about bigotry. Our old way of life that sort of first with our needs and that believed in then you're fine. And it will be richer and better than you can ever imagine. That's what it means about losing life to find it. And then there's this business, about the yoke and burden and it goes along with the cross. I mean, my word, is there anything more paradoxical in Christianity than the cross? It is both this horrible instrument of violence and death and destruction, and it is also a vehicle for salvation and grace and forgiveness and love and new life. How's that? But there it is. And about the cross, Jesus isn't saying carry my cross. He's saying, pick up your cross and follow me. Because he knows that we all have our crosses to bear. And what he's promising, if we're willing to join in with his yoke, is that he will help us bear it. We don't have to carry our crosses on our own. I imagine that many of you didn't grow up on a farm, so the notion of a yoke doesn't give you much of a visual. But a yoke is sort of a long wooden sort of beam with underneath it these sort of rings where you could put an animal's head through, work animal's head through, sort of full of flowers. How did I do? Did I do all right? I'm a little nervous. I see you smiling at me. Did I do okay? Okay, all right. I bet you could have. I bet you could have. But the notion of the yoke, Jesus is saying is, would you put your head through my yoke? Let me put my head through the other ring. We will pull us back through the rockiest, through the deepest of mud, through the thickest of this. There is no burden that's too heavy for Jesus. His burden is light because he has the power of God to get him through it. And we can find that same power if we join his yoke. You see these images which seem to contradict each other, they can find a way to be knit together and be made whole. In it, they can find the light. But look, I suppose with paradoxes, especially with paradoxes in Scripture, we got a few choices we can make here. I mean, we can just try to dismiss them. We can try to water them down and simplify them. But you know what? Life is messy. It's not just paradoxes in Scripture, there are paradoxes in life. We don't find the richness of our faith just by watering it down and making it simple. We can wrestle with paradoxes. We can ask one another, what do you see in it? What do you see in it? How does that resonate for you? How do you find the truth? And wrestling with it, we can see that the parts hold together as a whole. It's hard work, but it's worth it. It reminds me, in fact, of what Michael Douglas says in that speech at the American president, where he said, being an American citizen is hard. Being an American is hard. It's advanced citizenship. You know what? In Christians, it's advanced citizenship. It's going to put up a fight if you really want to believe. But isn't that